The psychological toll of this feast or fast cycle was immense. The anxiety leading up to winter, the constant worry about whether your stores would last, the fear of starvation. These were pervasive emotions that shaped daily life. Every creak of the granary door, every rustle of a mouse sent a jolt of fear through you. The relief when spring finally arrived, bringing the promise of new growth, was almost overwhelming. A collective sigh of gratitude from the entire community. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time. Way back to a period often called the Dark Ages. Forget your perfectly stocked refrigerators and convenient grocery stores. Imagine a world where the very act of finding enough to eat was a daily struggle, a constant negotiation with nature, and a stark reminder of how fragile life could be. You're about to discover a culinary landscape that's less about delicious meals and more about sheer survival. A reality so harsh that you'd probably find yourself perpetually hungry. And frankly, you might not even make it through a single winter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. One common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the open field system of agriculture, which became prevalent in many parts of Europe. This system involved dividing communal land into large, unfenced fields, which were then further divided into strips cultivated by individual families. While it fostered communal labor and resource sharing, it also meant that everyone was subject to the same seasonal cycles and shared in the same risks of crop failure. The success or failure of the harvest was a truly collective experience. You feel the damp chill clinging to your rough wool tunic, a persistent cold that seems to seep into your very bones. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and something vaguely stale. The distant bleating of sheep and the lowing of cattle are the only sounds breaking the heavy silence of the early morning. You're in a small, scattered settlement, somewhere in what was once the sprawling Roman Empire. But now, the grandeur has faded, replaced by a patchwork of smaller, struggling communities. And as the sun, a pale, hesitant disk, begins its slow ascent, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the day's provisions. Now, for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you during periods of extreme scarcity, people in the Dark Ages sometimes resorted to eating famine foods that would normally be considered inedible or undesirable. This could include things like tree bark often ground and mixed with flour, acorns leached to remove tannins, wild roots that were normally ignored, or even the blood of animals mixed with flour. These were desperate measures, a stark testament to the depths of hunger they sometimes faced, highlighting the extreme ingenuity and grim determination required to survive. Your stomach rumbles, a familiar, low growl that's been your companion since childhood. You're not thinking of a lavish Roman banquet, or even a simple loaf of refined bread. Oh no, those days are long gone. Your reality is far more basic. For you, living in the wake of Rome's decline, the very concept of a reliable, abundant food supply has become a distant memory. This is the era where the sophisticated systems of the past have crumbled, leaving communities to fend for themselves. The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise frequency and severity of famines during the Dark Ages. While historical records are often sparse and localized, archaeological evidence, such as skeletal remains showing signs of malnutrition, and climatic data, like tree rings indicating periods of drought or excessive rain, help to paint a picture. Some scholars argue that localized famines were a regular occurrence, perhaps every few years, while widespread, devastating famines happened less frequently but had catastrophic impacts. Others contend that communities developed remarkable resilience and coping mechanisms, making true mass starvation less common than once believed. Though chronic hunger was widespread, it's a complex puzzle at trying to quantify the human cost of these periods of scarcity. The fall of the Western Roman Empire, roughly around 476 CE, wasn't just a political event. It was an agricultural catastrophe for many regions. The intricate network of Roman roads, which facilitated trade and the movement of goods, including food, began to decay. The large-scale, organized farming estates that fed the cities often fell into disuse or were broken up. The knowledge of advanced agricultural techniques, once widespread, became fragmented. Imagine a massive, complex machine, slowly seizing up, its gears grinding to a halt. That's what happened to the food supply. You recall a particularly long, cold winter when the snow seemed to fall endlessly. The last of your dried apples were gone, and the only fresh food was the occasional wild root you might dig from the frozen ground. Your body felt weak, your mind dulled by the constant hunger. You remember a moment when your elder, usually so stoic, looked at a piece of bark he was trying to chew and muttered, "I think this tree has more flavor than our last meal." You almost shivered, a rare moment of shared despair amidst the grim reality. Before the fall, a Roman citizen in a major city like Rome itself could expect grain from Egypt or North Africa, olive oil from Spain, and wine from Gaul. There was a system, however imperfect, of distribution. Now that system is shattered. You are largely dependent on what can be grown or gathered within a very small radius of your own village. The concept of importing food from hundreds, or even thousands of miles away is almost unthinkable. This is a world of localized sustenance, where a bad harvest in your immediate vicinity means real, tangible hunger. The social structure of the time, particularly the feudal system, exacerbated the impact of seasonal scarcity. While the lord of the manor might have larger reserves and better access to preserved foods, the peasant population bore the brunt of the lean times. Their share of the harvest was often just enough to survive a good year, leaving them incredibly vulnerable to crop failures or harsh winters. This created a constant tension between the need to feed the Lord and the desperate need to feed your own family. You remember stories from your elders, tales of a time when food was more plentiful, when bread was whiter, and when there was always enough to go around. They speak of bustling markets filled with goods from distant lands. These stories sound like myths now, like echoes from a forgotten golden age. Your reality is one of constant vigilance, of stretching every last morsel, of praying for favorable weather. The tools for eating remained simple, reflecting the utilitarian nature of meals during scarcity. Wooden bowls, rough spoons, and your own hands were the primary implements. Food was consumed quickly, efficiently, with little ceremony. There was no time for leisurely meals when every bite was a battle against hunger. The decline of urban centers also played a massive role. Roman cities were hubs of consumption, fed by the surrounding countryside and distant provinces. With fewer people living in cities, and those who remained often impoverished, the demand for surplus food plummeted. This, paradoxically, could lead to less incentive for large-scale agriculture, further exacerbating the problem when populations eventually began to recover. It created a vicious cycle: less demand, less production, less food. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of living with the constant threat of starvation. It instilled a deep sense of gratitude for every morsel, a profound understanding of the cycles of nature, and a fierce determination to protect your family and your community. It taught you humility, resilience, and a deep, almost primal respect for food itself. This intense connection to the land, to the cycles of planting and harvest, shaped every aspect of your daily life and your relationship with food. Furthermore, the constant instability of the era, the barbarian invasions, the shifting political landscapes, the localized warfare made consistent farming incredibly difficult. Who wants to invest time and effort in planting crops if an invading warband might sweep through and burn everything before harvest? This led to a focus on more resilient, less labor-intensive crops, and a general shift towards subsistence farming. You're not farming for profit, you're farming to stay alive. Sometimes, you'd hear stories from traveling merchants or wandering monks, tales of distant lands where the sun always shone, where harvests were always bountiful, and where famine was an unknown word. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. One common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the significant decline in population across Europe following the collapse of the Roman Empire, due to factors like warfare, famine, and plague. This demographic shift directly impacted food production and consumption patterns. Fewer people meant less organized labor for large-scale agriculture, and smaller and more isolated communities had to become self-sufficient, relying on local resources. This decentralization of society directly mirrored the decentralization of food systems. The seasonal scarcity of the Dark Ages, while seemingly terrible, was a testament to human adaptability. It wasn't designed for pleasure or consistent abundance. It was designed for raw survival in a fragmented, unpredictable world. And it worked. People endured, they adapted, and they slowly began to rebuild, fueled by the ingenuity and sheer physical effort that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are a living testament to that adaptability. Your body hardened by the regimen, your spirit unbroken by the constant demands of a challenging era. Now for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you during the early Dark Ages. There was a noticeable shift in the types of grains cultivated. While wheat remained important, especially in former Roman heartlands, hardier, more resilient grains like rye and oats became increasingly prevalent, particularly in northern Europe. These grains could grow in poorer soils and harsher climates, offering a more reliable, albeit less palatable as food source in unpredictable times. So, while you might dream of a fine wheat loaf, you're more likely to be chewing on something much darker and denser. As the pale light of dawn strengthens, promising another cold day, you finish your meager breakfast, another piece of coarse bread, perhaps a few dried beans. You clean your wooden bowl, ready it for tomorrow, and prepare for another day of arduous labor, always with one eye on the dwindling stores. The sounds of the awakening village fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of birds. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of simple, hard-won food that awaits you with the next meal, and the hope that spring will come soon. The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise extent and duration of the darkness in the Dark Ages, particularly concerning agricultural output and food availability. Some scholars argue that the decline was not as universal or severe as once thought, with certain regions maintaining relatively stable food systems. Others contend that the evidence of widespread famine, disease, and population decline points to a truly challenging period for food security across much of Europe. It's a complex puzzle, trying to reconstruct the exact dietary realities of a fragmented world. You feel the persistent, dull ache in your stomach, a familiar emptiness that seems to echo the vast, open spaces of the manor. The scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint, lingering aroma of stale bread hangs in the air of your modest dwelling. Gone are the anxieties of seasonal scarcity, replaced by the stark reality of your daily diet. Now your world is defined by the absence of a particular culinary delight meat. And as the sun, a weak, watery disk, begins its slow ascent towards the horizon, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the meager protein sources that sustain your life. You recall a particularly harsh winter when the snow fell relentlessly, burying the meager fields. The last of the stored grain dwindled, and the fear of starvation was a cold, constant companion. You'd heard whispers of desperate measures taken in neighboring villages, of people eating bark or even leather. One evening, your elderly neighbor, his face gaunt, looked at the last few handfuls of dried beans and muttered, "The Romans may have built roads, but they didn't teach us how to eat stones." You almost smiled, a rare moment of grim humor amidst the stark reality. Your stomach, a familiar void, reminds you of the constant, underlying hunger that permeates life in these fragmented times. You're not thinking of a juicy roast, a succulent cut of beef, or a plump chicken. Oh no, your reality is far more humble. For you, living as a peasant in the Dark Ages, fresh meat is a luxury, a distant dream reserved for the privileged few or for rare, fleeting moments of celebration. The collapse of trade routes meant that exotic foods, once available to the Roman elite, completely vanished from the common person's diet. Spices from the east, fine wines from distant vineyards, olives from the Mediterranean, these became mythical luxuries, remembered only in fragmented tales. Your palate, if it ever had a chance to develop a taste for such things, was now entirely recalibrated to the local and the basic. This forced localization of diet meant a severe reduction in variety and nutritional diversity. You watch as your neighbor, a grizzled old man with hands gnarled from years of labor, carefully skins a rabbit he managed to snare. The sight of fresh blood, the promise of warm flesh, sends a pang of longing through you. But you know that this is a rare occurrence, a stroke of luck, not a daily reality. For the vast majority of the population, meat was not a staple, it was a supplement, a treat, or a last resort. Imagine trying to build muscle and sustain heavy physical labor on a diet almost entirely devoid of animal protein. It's a challenge that defines your very existence. One of your children, eyes wide with hope, might whisper, "Papa, will we have rabbit for dinner?" You'd simply shake your head, a tired, knowing smile, and say, "Perhaps, my child, if the Lord allows." The constant threat of raiding, whether from Vikings, Magyars, or other local warlords, also forced communities to adapt their food storage and production. Instead of large, exposed granaries, food might be hidden, buried, or stored in smaller, more defensible locations. This made large-scale agricultural surplus less practical and more risky. You learned to be incredibly resourceful, to hide your precious stores, and to protect them with your life. The rarity of meat for the common peasant was due to several interconnected factors. Firstly, land was primarily dedicated to growing grain, the absolute necessity for survival. Every available acre was needed for wheat, barley, rye, or oats, as these crops provided the bulk of the calories. Raising livestock, especially large animals like cattle, required significant pasture land, which was often scarce or reserved for the Lord's use. Pigs, being easier to keep and able to forage in woodlands, were more common, but still not abundant enough for daily consumption by everyone. Even the tools of agriculture suffered. The sophisticated iron tools and plows of the Roman era were often lost or broken, and the knowledge to forge and maintain them became scarce. This led to a reliance on simpler, less efficient farming methods, further reducing yields. You might find yourself working the soil with a wooden ard, a far cry from the heavy plows that once turned the rich earth. It's a constant struggle against the very ground you depend on. Secondly, animals were incredibly valuable for reasons other than just meat. Cattle provided milk, cheese, and most importantly, labor for plowing the fields. Sheep provided wool for clothing. Chickens provided eggs. To slaughter an animal for meat was to sacrifice its other valuable contributions. A decision not taken lightly, it was an investment, a living resource, far more precious alive than dead, unless absolutely necessary. The social structure also shifted. With the decline of central authority, land ownership became more localized and fragmented. The rise of feudalism meant that peasants were tied to the land, working for a lord in exchange for protection and a share of the harvest. While this offered some stability, it also meant that the peasant's diet was largely dictated by the lord and the productivity of their small plot. You were not in control of your own food supply. You were a cog in a new, often harsh system. When meat was consumed by peasants, it was often in the form of preserved products. Pork was frequently salted and smoked, creating bacon or ham that could last through the winter. This was a crucial way to store protein, but it was still a limited resource. Carefully rationed, fish, especially in regions near rivers or the coast, provided another important source of protein, often dried or salted for preservation. You might chew on a piece of tough, dried fish, its salty flavor a stark reminder of its journey from the water to your plate. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of living with constant food insecurity. Every harvest was a moment of intense anxiety. Every winter was a period of dread. The fear of famine was a pervasive, underlying current in daily life. It shaped your decisions, your relationships, and your entire worldview. It taught you humility, resilience, and a deep, almost primal respect for food itself. For the common peasant, the primary source of protein came from legumes, peas, beans, and lentils. These were grown alongside grains and formed a crucial part of the daily diet. They would be boiled into thick stews, added to porridges, or made into simple, dense patties. While nutritious, they lacked the richness and satisfying texture of meat. You learn to appreciate the earthy flavor of a handful of boiled lentils, a welcome addition to the monotony of grain. Sometimes, you'd hear rumors of distant lands where food was more plentiful, where the sun always shone, and where harvests were always bountiful. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. Wild game. While theoretically available, I bet it was often restricted by hunting laws. The lord of the manor typically held exclusive hunting rights, reserving the forests and their inhabitants for his own pleasure and table. Poaching was a dangerous, often deadly offense, punishable by severe penalties. So, while deer, boar, or birds might roam the nearby woods, they were largely out of reach for the common villager. This created a constant tension, a longing for the forbidden bounty of the forest. The food system of the Dark Ages, while seemingly terrible, was a testament to human adaptability. It wasn't designed for pleasure or variety. It was designed for raw survival in a fragmented, unpredictable world. And it worked. People endured. They adapted. And they slowly began to rebuild, fueled by the ingenuity and resilience that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are a living testament to that adaptability. Your body hardened by the regimen, your spirit unbroken by the constant demands of a challenging era. Even when an animal was slaughtered, no part of it went to waste. Every organ, every scrap of fat, every bone was utilized. Blood might be used in puddings or mixed with flour. Bones were boiled for broth, extracting every last bit of nutrient. This nose-to-tail philosophy was born not out of culinary preference, but out of absolute necessity. It was a testament to the resourcefulness demanded by scarcity. As the pale light of dawn strengthens, you finish your meager breakfast, another piece of coarse bread, perhaps a handful of dried berries if you were fortunate enough to find some. You clean your wooden bowl, ready it for tomorrow, and prepare for another day of arduous labor in the fields. The sounds of the awakening village fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of birds. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of simple, hard-won food that awaits you with the next meal. Imagine the sheer physical exertion required to maintain this lifestyle. You're working the fields from dawn till dusk, plowing, sowing, weeding, and harvesting. Then you're grinding grain, collecting firewood, mending tools. All of this on a diet that, by modern standards, seems incredibly lacking in readily available protein. It truly highlights the incredible resilience and physical conditioning of the people of the Dark Ages. They weren't just living, they were enduring, fueled by what little they could get. You feel the familiar ache in your back as you bend over the rough, grinding stone. The rhythmic scrape of stone against stone, a constant, monotonous soundtrack to your morning. The air in your small, smoky hut is thick with the fine dust of grain, coating your nostrils and settling on your eyelashes. Gone are the echoes of Roman grandeur and the complexities of shattered trade routes. Now, your world is defined by a single, unyielding truth. Grain is king. And as the sun, still a pale promise in the gray sky, begins its slow ascent, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the day's most fundamental task, preparing your daily bread. A common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the strong influence of the Christian church on daily life, including dietary practices. Fasting days where meat was forbidden were common throughout the year, particularly during Lent and Advent, and often on Fridays. On these days, people would rely even more heavily on fish, legumes, and dairy products. This religious observance, while spiritual, also had a practical impact, reinforcing the rarity of meat consumption for many. You would observe these fasts, a communal act of piety that further shaped your dietary rhythm. Your stomach, a familiar void, reminds you of the constant, underlying hunger that permeates life in these fragmented times. You're not thinking of a varied meal, a culinary adventure. Oh no. Your reality is far more singular. For you, living in the heart of the Dark Ages, the very concept of sustenance revolves almost entirely around cereals. Wheat, barley, rye, oats. These are not just crops, they are life itself. Now for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you while fresh meat was rare. Dairy products like cheese and curds were much more common sources of animal protein and fat for peasants. Milk from cows, sheep, and goats was churned into butter or fermented into cheese, which could be stored for longer periods. These dairy products provided vital nutrients that supplemented the grain and legume-heavy diet, especially during periods when fresh meat was completely unavailable. So, while a steak was a dream, a chunk of hard cheese might have been a more frequent reality. You push down on the heavy upper stone, turning it slowly, feeling the resistance as it grinds against the lower one. A thin stream of coarse flour trickles out, mixed with bits of bran and sometimes even tiny fragments of stone from the mill itself. This isn't the finely sifted, pure white flour of later eras. This is the raw, unrefined essence of the earth, destined to become your daily bread. Imagine trying to bake a delicate pastry with this. It would be a culinary disaster, but for survival, it's perfection. One of your children, perhaps trying to help, might ask, "Mama, why does our bread always taste like dirt?" You'd simply smile, a tired, knowing smile, and say, "Because, my child, dirt is what keeps us alive." The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise protein intake of the common peasant during the Dark Ages. While records indicate a high reliance on grains and legumes, the exact contribution of dairy, eggs, and occasional small game or preserved meats is difficult to quantify. Some scholars argue that chronic protein deficiency was widespread, impacting growth and overall health. Others contend that the combination of various plant-based proteins, along with opportunistic animal products, provided a surprisingly adequate, albeit minimal, protein supply for their physically active lives. It's a complex puzzle, trying to reconstruct the exact nutritional balance of a diet heavily influenced by scarcity and social hierarchy. The omnipresence of grain in your diet is absolute. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The core remains the same. You might have a thick porridge, a dense, unyeasted bread, or a thin, watery gruel. The variations are minor, the flavors subtle, and the texture often challenging. It's a diet designed for sheer caloric intake, for providing the energy needed for grueling physical labor, day in and day out. You eat it because it's there, because it's what you can grow, and because it's what keeps the gnawing hunger at bay. You recall a particularly long, arduous journey to the nearest market town. You had managed to trade some surplus flax for a small piece of salted pork, a rare and precious commodity. You remember the careful way your wife wrapped it, the anticipation in your children's eyes. That evening, the small piece of pork, boiled with a few dried peas, was savored like the finest delicacy. You remember your youngest, usually so boisterous, quietly chewing, and then, with a satisfied sigh, murmuring, "I think this pork tastes like a king's feast." It was a moment of profound gratitude, a testament to the power of a rare treat. Wheat, where it could be grown, was often preferred. But it was a demanding crop, requiring good soil and consistent weather. In many regions, especially further north or in less fertile areas, hardier grains like rye and oats became the staples. Rye, with its distinctive dark color and robust flavor, was particularly resilient, able to grow in poorer soils and withstand harsher climates. Oats, while sometimes seen as animal feed, were a crucial source of sustenance for humans too, often made into porridges or flatbreads. You learn to appreciate the subtle differences, the slightly sweeter taste of barley, the earthy depth of rye. The social structure of the time, particularly the feudal system, starkly highlighted the disparity in meat consumption. The lord and his retinue would regularly consume various meats, often from their own hunting reserves or from the livestock raised on their demesne. Their tables might groan under the weight of roasted game, fowl, and prime cuts of beef or pork. This was not just about sustenance. It was a display of wealth, power, and status. A visual and culinary demarcation between the ruling class and the working class. You would occasionally see the lord's hunting party return, their carts laden with deer or boar, a stark reminder of the food you could only dream of. The process of turning grain into food was laborious and time-consuming. From planting to harvest, it was a year-long cycle of back-breaking work. Then came the threshing, separating the grain from the chaff, often done by hand or with simple flails. After that, the crucial step of milling. If you were lucky, your village might have a watermill or a windmill, a marvel of engineering that could grind large quantities of grain. But for many, it was the hand quern, a personal, portable mill that demanded hours of physical effort each day. You feel the ache in your arms, the burn in your shoulders, a constant reminder of the effort that goes into every mouthful. The tools for eating meat, when it was available, were simple as a sharp knife for carving. And your hands? There were no forks, no delicate serving implements. It was a direct, primal act of consumption. Even for the lord, the focus was on tearing and gnawing, a less refined experience than modern dining. This constant grinding meant that your bread, even when baked, was often coarse, gritty, and dense. It wasn't uncommon for small stones from the mill to end up in the flour, leading to significant wear and tear on your teeth over a lifetime. Imagine the dental bills you might find yourself carefully picking out a particularly large piece of grit, a small act of defiance against the harshness of your daily fare. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of knowing that a significant portion of your diet was forever out of reach, reserved for those of higher birth. It instilled a deep sense of resignation, but also a fierce determination to make the most of what you had. It taught you resourcefulness, patience, and a profound appreciation for every scrap of food, regardless of its origin. This constant awareness of scarcity shaped every aspect of your daily life and your relationship with food. Beyond the raw grain, legumes were another vital component. Peas, beans, and lentils were cultivated and consumed widely. These provided much-needed protein and fiber, complementing the carbohydrate-heavy grains. They would often be boiled into thick stews or added to porridges, making the meal more substantial and nutritious. You learn to appreciate the earthy flavor of a handful of boiled lentils, a welcome addition to the monotony. Sometimes, you'd hear stories from traveling minstrels or returning crusaders, tales of distant lands where exotic animals roamed, or where meat was so plentiful it was almost wasted. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. Vegetables were largely seasonal and dependent on what could be grown in your small garden plot or foraged from the wild. Cabbages, onions, leeks, and root vegetables like turnips and parsnips were common. These would be added to stews or eaten boiled. Fresh greens were a luxury of spring and summer, eagerly consumed when available. The lack of variety, especially during the long winter months, meant that vitamin deficiencies were a constant threat. You crave the crispness of a fresh leaf, the sweetness of a ripe berry. But those are fleeting pleasures. The rarity of meat in the Dark Ages diet, while seemingly terrible, was a testament to human adaptability. It wasn't designed for pleasure or consistent abundance. It was designed for raw survival in a fragmented, unpredictable world. And it worked. People endured. They adapted. And they slowly began to rebuild, fueled by the ingenuity and sheer physical effort that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are a living testament to that adaptability. Your body hardened by the regimen, your spirit unbroken by the constant demands of a challenging era. The preservation of food was rudimentary but essential. Grains were stored in granaries or pits, carefully protected from rodents and dampness. Legumes and some vegetables could be dried. Meat, when available, would be salted, smoked, or dried. Fermentation, as we'll discuss later, was also key. Without these methods, survival through the lean winter months would have been impossible. You learn to be a master of storage, constantly checking your provisions, guarding them fiercely as the pale light of dawn strengthens. Promising another day of labor, you finish your meager breakfast, another piece of coarse bread, perhaps a few boiled peas. You clean your wooden bowl, ready it for tomorrow, and prepare for another day of arduous labor in the fields. The sounds of the awakening village fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of birds. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of simple, hard-won food that awaits you with the next meal, and the hope that perhaps, one day, there might be a little more than just grain and legumes. Imagine the sheer physical exertion required to maintain this lifestyle. You're working the fields from dawn till dusk, plowing, sowing, weeding, and harvesting. Then you're grinding grain, collecting firewood, mending tools. All of this on a diet that, by modern standards, seems incredibly basic and lacking in variety. It truly highlights the incredible resilience and physical conditioning of the people of the Dark Ages. They weren't just living, they were enduring. Fueled by the very earth beneath their feet, you feel the damp earth beneath your worn boots, the chill seeping through the thin leather as you push aside a tangle of brambles. The scent of decaying leaves and rich, moist soil fills your nostrils, a stark contrast to the familiar aroma of wood smoke and stale grain. Gone are the anxieties of meat scarcity and the relentless monotony of bread and porridge. Now, your world is defined by a different kind of culinary ingenuity, foraging and fermentation. The ancient survival skills that stretch meager supplies and add a fleeting touch of variety to your diet. And as the sun, a weak, watery disk, struggles to break through the overcast sky, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the hidden bounties of the forest and the transformative power of time. A common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the widespread adoption of the heavy plow in northern Europe. This invention, often pulled by oxen, allowed farmers to cultivate the heavier, wetter soils of the region more effectively than the lighter Roman airds. While its adoption was gradual, it significantly increased agricultural productivity over time, eventually leading to greater food surpluses and supporting population growth. You might see one of these massive plows being pulled through a neighboring field, a testament to the slow but steady technological advancements of the era. Your stomach, a familiar void, reminds you of the constant, underlying hunger that permeates life in these fragmented times. You're not thinking of a perfectly curated meal, a dish prepared with exotic ingredients. Oh no, your reality is far more primal. For you, living as a peasant in the Dark Ages, the ability to find food where others see only wilderness, and to preserve it through ancient methods, is not just a skill, it is a lifeline. Now for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you while grain was king. The practice of gleaning was incredibly important for survival. After the harvest, the poor, the elderly, and children would be allowed to go into the fields and collect any leftover grains that had fallen. This seemingly small act could mean the difference between starvation and survival for many families, highlighting the desperate measures taken to secure every last kernel of food. It was a communal understanding, a silent agreement that no edible resource should go to waste. You move through the sparse woodland, your eyes scanning the ground, your senses acutely attuned to the subtle signs of edible plants. This isn't a leisurely stroll, it's a focused hunt, a quiet negotiation with nature. You know which roots are safe to dig, which berries are poisonous, and which leaves can add a bitter yet vital greenness to your stew. You might spot a patch of wild garlic, its pungent aroma a welcome change from the blandness of your daily fare. Or perhaps a cluster of wild sorrel, its tart leaves a burst of freshness. Imagine trying to identify edible plants without a field guide or Google. It's a knowledge passed down through generations, a silent language of survival. One of your elders, with a knowing wink, might once have told you. The forest is a generous larder, if you know how to ask it nicely and discreetly. The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise yields of grain crops during the Dark Ages. While written records are scarce and often unreliable, archaeologists use evidence from pollen analysis, seed remains, and the size of granaries to estimate productivity. Some scholars argue that yields were incredibly low, barely enough to sustain the population, leading to frequent famines. Others contend that local variations were significant, and that in fertile areas, yields might have been higher than previously assumed, allowing for some regional surpluses. It's a complex puzzle, trying to reconstruct the exact agricultural output of a fragmented and often undocumented period. Foraging was a crucial supplement to the cultivated crops, especially during the lean months or after a poor harvest. Wild berries, like blackberries, raspberries, and elderberries, provided precious vitamins and a rare burst of sweetness in late summer and autumn. Nuts, such as hazelnuts and walnuts, offered valuable fats and protein, carefully gathered and stored for winter. Mushrooms, if identified correctly, could add flavor and nutrients to stews. You learn to distinguish between the edible and the deadly, a lesson that could literally save your life. You recall a particularly challenging harvest season. The rains came too early, then stopped too soon, leaving some of the grain stunted, others rotting in the damp fields. The anxiety in the village was palpable. Every family worked tirelessly, trying to salvage what they could. You remember a moment when a young boy, exhausted and covered in mud, looked at a handful of half-rotted ears of wheat and muttered, "I think even the worms are hungry this year." You almost sighed, a rare moment of shared despair amidst the grim reality. Beyond the immediate consumption of wild edibles, preservation was key. Drying was one of the simplest and most widespread methods. Berries could be spread on mats and left in the sun or near a gentle fire to dry. concentrating their sugars and extending their shelf life. Mushrooms could be strung on threads and hung to dry, becoming tough but flavorful additions to winter meals. Herbs, gathered from the wild or from small garden plots, were also dried to preserve their flavors and medicinal properties. You feel the brittle texture of dried herbs between your fingers, knowing they will add a hint of something special to a bland meal months from now. The social structure of the time, particularly the emerging feudal system, deeply impacted food distribution. The lord of the manor would claim a significant portion of the harvest as rent or tribute, leaving the peasant farmer with just enough, or sometimes barely enough, to survive. This created a delicate balance, where a single bad harvest could tip a family or an entire village into starvation. You learn to measure your expectations, to never truly feel secure, even after a good harvest. But perhaps the most transformative and vital preservation technique was fermentation. This ancient process, harnessing the power of microorganisms, turned perishable foods into long-lasting, nutritious staples. We've already touched on ale, but fermentation extended to many other aspects of the Dark Ages diet. Vegetables, particularly cabbages, were often lacto-fermented to create a form of sauerkraut. This process not only preserved the vegetables, but also increased their nutritional value, making vitamins more bioavailable and adding beneficial probiotics. Imagine the tangy crunch of fermented cabbage, a stark contrast to the soft, boiled greens of summer. The tools of food preparation were simple stone querns for grinding, clay pots for boiling, and open fires for cooking. There were no elaborate ovens for most common folk. Bread was often baked on a flat stone or in the ashes of a fire, leading to its characteristic dense, flat shape. The flavors were unadorned, the textures often rough. It was food that demanded work, both in its preparation and its consumption. Dairy products were also extensively fermented. Milk, which spoils quickly, was transformed into cheese, curds, and various forms of sour milk. These products could be stored for months, providing essential protein and fat, especially during the long winter when fresh milk was scarce. You might churn milk into butter, or press curds into a hard cheese, feeling the cool, firm texture beneath your hands. These were not just foods, they were triumphs of ingenuity, stretching the bounty of the land far beyond its natural season. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of knowing that your entire existence, your very life, depended on the success of a few crops. Every cloud, every ray of sunshine, every drop of rain was scrutinized with an almost religious intensity. The weather wasn't just a topic of conversation, it was a matter of life and death. This intense connection to the land, to the cycles of nature, shaped every aspect of your daily life and your relationship with food. Meat, when available, it was preserved through salting and smoking. These methods removed moisture and inhibited bacterial growth, allowing cuts of pork, beef, or fish to last for extended periods. Imagine the rich, smoky aroma of a piece of cured ham hanging in your larder, a silent promise of sustenance in the lean months. This was a crucial way to store precious protein, ensuring that nothing went to waste. Sometimes, you'd hear stories from traveling merchants or wandering monks, tales of distant lands where the soil was richer, where the sun shone brighter, and where harvests were always bountiful. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. The knowledge of these foraging and fermentation techniques was passed down through generations, a vital part of the oral tradition of the time. There were no cookbooks, no written instructions. You learned by watching, by doing, by experimenting, and sometimes by making mistakes. This practical wisdom was as valuable as any tool, a cornerstone of survival in a world without modern conveniences. You feel the weight of this accumulated knowledge, a silent inheritance from your ancestors. The reliance on grain in the Dark Ages, while seemingly terrible, was a testament to human resilience. It wasn't designed for pleasure or variety. It was designed for raw survival in a fragmented, unpredictable world. And it worked. People endured, they adapted, and they slowly began to rebuild, fueled by the ingenuity and sheer physical effort that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are a living testament to that adaptability. Your body hardened by the regimen, your spirit unbroken by the constant demands of a challenging era. Imagine the sheer physical exertion required to maintain this lifestyle. You're not just working the fields, you're walking miles through forests, bending to dig roots, climbing trees for nuts, and spending hours preparing and preserving food. All of this on a diet that, while resourceful, was still often on the edge of sufficiency. It truly highlights the incredible resilience and ingenuity of the people of the Dark Ages. They weren't just living, they were actively making do, squeezing every last bit of sustenance from their environment. As the pale light of dawn strengthens, you finish your meager breakfast. Another piece of coarse bread, perhaps a handful of boiled beans if you were fortunate enough to have them. You clean your wooden bowl, ready it for tomorrow, and prepare for another day of arduous labor in the fields. The sounds of the awakening village fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of birds. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of simple, hard-won food that awaits you with the next meal. A common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the relatively low population density compared to the Roman era, especially in rural areas. This meant that vast tracts of land remained wild or semi-wild, providing opportunities for foraging that would have been less available in more densely populated or intensively farmed regions. The forest, often seen as a dangerous place, was also a vital resource, a green larder that supplemented the meager harvests of the fields. You would have known the paths and secrets of your local woods intimately. You feel the persistent gnawing in your stomach, a hollow ache that has become as familiar as the rough fabric of your tunic. The air in your small, smoky dwelling is thick, with the scent of wood smoke and the faint, earthy aroma of stale grain. Gone are the laborious hours spent at the grinding stone and the omnipresent dust of the mill. Now your world is defined by the relentless monotony of your meals, bread and porridge, day in and day out. And as the sun, still a pale, distant light in the gray sky, begins its slow ascent, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the day's meager provisions. Now for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you, while many fermented foods were made for consumption. Some cultures in the Dark Ages also fermented grains or fruits to create vinegar, which was used not just for flavoring, but also as a mild disinfectant or preservative for other foods. The sharp acidity of vinegar could help inhibit spoilage, making it a valuable multi-purpose household staple. So, that tangy taste in your food might have been a deliberate act of preservation, not just a culinary choice. Your stomach, a familiar void, reminds you of the constant, underlying hunger that permeates life in these fragmented times. You're not thinking of a varied meal, a culinary adventure. Oh no. Your reality is far more repetitive. For you, living in the heart of the Dark Ages, the very concept of sustenance revolves almost entirely around the same few, uninspiring dishes. The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise impact of foraging and fermentation on the overall nutritional health of Dark Ages populations. Some scholars argue that these practices, especially the consumption of wild greens and fermented foods, provided crucial micronutrients that helped to mitigate the deficiencies of a grain-heavy diet, contributing to surprising levels of resilience. Others contend that while beneficial, these supplements were often insufficient to fully counteract chronic malnutrition, especially during periods of widespread famine. It's a complex puzzle trying to balance the evidence of hardship with the undeniable ingenuity of their survival strategies. You reach for a piece of your daily bread. It's dense, often dark, made from coarse flour that still contains bits of bran and sometimes even tiny fragments of stone. It's unyeasted, meaning it lacks the light, airy texture of modern loaves, resembling more a thick, heavy cracker or a very firm flatbread. You break off a piece, feeling its resistance, its almost brick-like quality. You chew slowly, deliberately, trying to extract every last bit of energy from it. This isn't just food, it's a caloric necessity. A compact block of sustenance designed to keep you going through grueling physical labor. Imagine trying to enjoy this with a fine wine. It would be a culinary mismatch of epic proportions. But for survival, it's indispensable. One of your neighbors, perhaps with a sigh, might remark, "This bread is so hard. I think it could break a tooth before it breaks my hunger." You recall a particularly lean winter, when the last of the stored grain was almost gone. You remembered your grandmother's words about the wild roots that grew even in the frozen earth. You spent hours digging, your fingers numb with cold, unearthing tough, fibrous roots that, once boiled and pounded, added a much-needed bulk to your thin porridge. You remember your youngest, usually so quiet, looking at the steaming bowl and, with a rare smile, murmuring, "I think this tastes like hope." It was a moment of profound, quiet triumph, a testament to the power of ancient knowledge. The texture is rough, the flavor earthy and often bland, sometimes with a slightly sour tang if the grain was a bit old or the fermentation process for the dough was less than perfect. You eat it because you must, because it's what you have, and because it's what keeps the gnawing hunger at bay. It's a constant reminder of the scarcity that defines your existence. The social structure of the time, particularly the feudal system, meant that foraging rights could sometimes be restricted by the lord, especially in his personal woodlands. However, for most common lands and forests, the right to gather wild foods was an unwritten, vital agreement. This communal access to wild resources was a crucial safety net, providing a buffer against outright starvation when harvests failed. You would share knowledge of good foraging spots with your neighbors, a silent network of survival, beyond the ubiquitous bread. The other cornerstone of your diet is porridge, or gruel. This is essentially boiled grain, often oats, barley, or rye, mixed with water and cooked until it forms a thick, sticky consistency. It's served warm, sometimes lukewarm, and rarely seasoned beyond a pinch of salt. If you're lucky enough to have it, imagine a bowl of oatmeal but without the sugar, the fruit, or any of the delightful additions you might be accustomed to. This is the ultimate comfort food of the Dark Ages, not because it's delicious, but because it's warm and filling. The tools for foraging and fermentation were simple digging sticks, baskets woven from reeds, clay pots, and wooden barrels. There were no elaborate machines, no complex instruments. It was a direct, hands-on process, connecting you intimately with the raw materials of your food. Every step, from gathering to preserving, was a labor of love and necessity. You scoop a spoonful of porridge into your mouth. It's thick, almost gluey, and slides down with a satisfying warmth. It provides a slow, sustained release of energy, crucial for the long hours of manual labor in the fields or around the homestead. The variations are minimal. Sometimes it might be thicker, sometimes thinner, depending on the availability of grain and water. Occasionally, if you're fortunate, a few foraged greens or dried legumes might be boiled into it, adding a hint of different texture or flavor. But these are rare, fleeting moments of culinary excitement. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of knowing that your very survival depended not just on your cultivated fields, but on your ability to read the landscape, to understand the secrets of the wild, and to transform perishable goods into enduring sustenance. It instilled a deep sense of self-reliance, a profound respect for nature's bounty, and an unwavering determination to make the most of every opportunity. This constant engagement with your environment shaped every aspect of your daily life and your relationship with food. This constant repetition of bread and porridge meant that your diet was incredibly monotonous. Your taste buds, if they ever had a chance to develop a wide range of preferences, were now accustomed to the subtle variations of grains. You learned to distinguish between the slightly sweeter taste of barley, the earthy depth of rye, and the more neutral flavor of oats. These were not culinary choices, they were necessities, dictated by what could be grown in your region and what had survived the previous harvest. Sometimes, you'd hear stories from traveling merchants or wandering monks, tales of distant lands where exotic spices grew, or where fruits ripened year-round without the need for drying or fermenting. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. The lack of variety also meant a constant battle against nutritional deficiencies. While grains provided ample carbohydrates for energy, and legumes offered some protein, the scarcity of fresh fruits, vegetables, and animal products meant that vitamins and minerals were often in short supply. You might suffer from dull skin, brittle hair, or a general lack of energy, symptoms that you simply accept as part of life, unaware of their dietary origins. This isn't just a matter of taste, it's a matter of health. The practices of foraging and fermentation in the Dark Ages, while born of necessity, were a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. They weren't designed for culinary luxury. They were designed for raw survival, for health, and for stretching meager resources in a fragmented, unpredictable world. And they worked. People endured, they adapted, and they slowly began to rebuild, fueled by the ancient wisdom and sheer physical effort that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are a living testament to that adaptability. Your body hardened by the regimen, your spirit unbroken by the constant demands of a challenging era. The preparation of these staple foods was simple, reflecting the limited tools and resources available. Bread was often baked on a flat stone over an open fire, or in the ashes, giving it a smoky flavor and a hard crust. Porridge was cooked in a single large pot, often shared by the entire family or even the community. There were no elaborate recipes, no complex cooking techniques. Efficiency and utility were paramount. You learned to cook quickly, to conserve fuel, and to make every ingredient count. As the pale light of dawn strengthens, promising another day of labor and searching, you finish your meager breakfast, another piece of coarse bread, perhaps a few fermented greens. You clean your wooden bowl, ready it for tomorrow, and prepare for another day of arduous labor in the fields, always with one eye on the wild, hoping for its hidden gifts. The sounds of the awakening village fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of birds. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of simple, hard-won food that awaits you with the next meal, and the hope that the earth will continue to provide. Imagine the psychological impact of eating the same few dishes, day in and day out, for your entire life. Your dreams might be filled with images of roasted meat, sweet fruits, or rich stews, foods that exist only in whispered tales or the memories of older generations. But when you wake, the reality is another piece of dense bread, another bowl of plain porridge. It's a constant test of mental fortitude, a quiet resignation to the limits of your world. You feel the soft, yielding cushion beneath you, the fine linen cool against your skin. A stark contrast to the rough wool and damp earth you've known. The scent of roasted meat, rich spices, and fine wine fills the great hall, a symphony of aromas that tantalizes your senses. Gone are the days of foraging in the wild and the endless labor of fermentation. Now, your world is defined by a different kind of culinary reality, the table of a feudal lord. A place of privilege, but still, a place shaped by the era's limitations. And as the sun, a golden orb, streams through the stained glass windows, illuminating the vibrant tapestries on the walls, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the bounty, or lack thereof, that defines the lives of the nobility. One common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the prevalence of communal eating. Meals were often shared among family members, and sometimes even within larger village groups, especially during feasts or after collective labor. This communal aspect fostered a sense of community and mutual support, but it also meant that everyone shared in the same monotonous diet. You would sit around a central fire, sharing your meager portions, a silent understanding passing between you and your neighbors. Your stomach, no longer a familiar void, is instead pleasantly full, a sensation of contentment that is a luxury in this age. You're not thinking of mere sustenance, of basic calories. Oh no, your reality is far more indulgent, yet still constrained by the technology and logistics of the Dark Ages. For you, sitting at the high table, the very concept of food is intertwined with status, power, and the occasional, fleeting moment of true culinary pleasure. Now for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you while bread was a staple. The concept of trencher bread was common, particularly in the later Dark Ages and early medieval period. This was a thick, stale slice of bread used as a plate, upon which other foods, if any, would be placed. After the meal, the trencher, soaked with juices and scraps, would either be eaten by the diner, given to servants, or fed to animals. It highlights the absolute value of every piece of grain and the ingenious ways people maximized its utility, leaving no crumb to waste. You watch as servants, moving with quiet efficiency, bring forth platters laden with roasted meats, a whole boar perhaps, its skin crackling, its savory aroma filling the hall. Or a joint of beef, glistening with fat, carved with practiced ease. This is the centerpiece of the noble diet, a testament to wealth and control over land and resources. Imagine trying to achieve this level of culinary display without modern refrigeration or transportation. It's a feat of logistics and privilege. One of your fellow nobles, raising a goblet of wine, might declare, "Ah, this boar's so fine. It makes me almost forget the endless squabbles over land." The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise palatability of Dark Ages food. While modern palates might find it bland and unappetizing, some scholars argue that the people of the time, accustomed to these flavors from birth, would have found them perfectly acceptable and even comforting. Others contend that the constant references to hunger and the occasional descriptions of more varied feasts suggest a widespread longing for culinary diversity, indicating that the monotony was indeed a hardship. It's a complex puzzle trying to understand the subjective experience of taste across centuries. Meat, for the nobility, was a daily staple, a stark contrast to the peasant's rare indulgence. Venison from the lord's private hunting grounds, wild boar from the forests, domestic beef, mutton, and a variety of fowl like chickens, ducks, geese, and even swans were common. These animals were raised on the lord's domain or hunted by his retainers. Ensuring a steady supply, the meat would be roasted, boiled, or stewed, often seasoned with herbs from the castle garden, and occasionally with precious spices brought by rare traders. You savor the rich, gamey taste of venison, its tender texture a delight after years of coarser fare. You recall a particularly long, dreary winter. The stored grains were running low, and the bread became thinner, the porridge more watery. The children's faces grew paler, their laughter less frequent. You remember a moment when your youngest, usually so eager for food, pushed away his bowl of thin gruel, his eyes filled with tears. You gently coaxed him, knowing that every spoonful was vital. You then, with a sigh, muttered, "This porridge is so thin. I think it's trying to escape the bowl." It was a moment of profound sadness, a shared understanding of the grim reality. Bread, while still a foundation, was often of a finer quality than that consumed by the peasants. Made from more carefully sifted wheat flour, it was lighter, whiter, and more palatable. It might even be leavened, a testament to the availability of better yeast and more controlled baking conditions. You break off a piece, feeling its softer texture, and use it to sop up the rich gravies from the meat. The social hierarchy of the time was also reflected in the diet, though the differences were often subtle for the common folk. While lords and nobles might have access to more meat and finer grains, the underlying staples of bread and porridge remained central even for them, albeit often in larger quantities or with slightly better preparation. The vast majority of the population, however, shared in the same basic, monotonous fare. Vegetables were consumed, often from the castle's own gardens. Cabbages, onions, leeks, carrots, parsnips, and various leafy greens would be cultivated. These would be boiled, stewed, or occasionally roasted. While still seasonal, the noble household had the resources to preserve more vegetables through pickling or drying, ensuring some variety through the winter months. You might enjoy a bowl of stew, rich with root vegetables and herbs, a comforting warmth in the belly. The tools of eating were as simple as the food itself: wooden bowls, spoons carved from horn or wood, and perhaps a dull knife. Forks were unheard of for commoners, and even for nobles. They were a later invention. You ate with your hands, scooping up porridge or tearing off pieces of bread. It was a tactile, primal experience, connecting you directly to the food that sustained you. Fruits were also enjoyed, largely seasonally, but often from dedicated orchards within the castle grounds. Apples, pears, plums, cherries, and various berries provided natural sweetness. These might be eaten fresh or preserved through drying, or by being cooked into tarts and pies. If a skilled cook was available, the taste of a fresh, crisp apple picked directly from the tree is a simple pleasure that few others in this age could regularly experience. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of knowing that your entire existence, your very life, depended on the success of a few crops, and that those crops would largely be consumed in the same two forms, day after day. It instilled a deep sense of gratitude for even the smallest portion, and a profound understanding of the cycles of nature. This intense connection to the land, to the cycles of planting and harvest, shaped every aspect of your daily life and your relationship with food. Ale remained a common beverage, but often of a higher quality, clearer, and perhaps stronger than the peasant's brew. Wine, however, was the drink of status. Produced in the Lord's own vineyards or imported from distant regions, wine was consumed regularly, often diluted with water, but still a symbol of wealth and refinement. You raise your goblet, the ruby liquid catching the light, its complex flavors a testament to the skill of the vintner. It's a far cry from the murky ale of the common folk, a clear indicator of your elevated status. Sometimes, you'd hear stories from traveling merchants or wandering monks, tales of distant monasteries where special herbs were grown, or of far-off lands where exotic fruits ripened under a different sun. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. The noble table also saw the occasional appearance of more exotic ingredients, brought by traveling merchants or as gifts from other lords. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, though incredibly expensive, would be used sparingly to flavor dishes, adding a touch of luxury and demonstrating the lord's ability to afford such rare commodities. Sweeteners like honey were common, and sugar, a truly rare and precious commodity, might appear in tiny amounts for special desserts. These were not just foods, they were statements of power and connection to the wider world. The monotonous diet of bread and porridge in the Dark Ages, while seemingly terrible, was a testament to human resilience. It wasn't designed for pleasure or variety. It was designed for raw survival in a fragmented, unpredictable world. And it worked. People endured, they adapted, and they slowly began to rebuild, fueled by the ingenuity and sheer physical effort that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are a living testament to that adaptability. Your body hardened by the regimen, your spirit unbroken by the constant demands of a challenging era. The logistical challenge of feeding a noble household was still significant, but vastly different from that of a peasant family. The Lord commanded resources, land, labor, and often a network of suppliers. Food was brought from his domain, from tribute paid by his vassals, and through trade, large larders, cellars, and smokehouses were maintained within the castle walls to store provisions. While still susceptible to bad harvests or sieges, the noble household had a much greater buffer against famine. This required meticulous management and a large, dedicated staff. As the pale light of dawn strengthens, you finish your meager breakfast, another piece of coarse bread, perhaps a final spoonful of thick porridge. You clean your wooden bowl, ready it for tomorrow, and prepare for another day of arduous labor in the fields. The sounds of the awakening village fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of birds. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of simple, hard-won food that awaits you with the next meal. Imagine the sheer physical exertion required to maintain this lifestyle. While you might not be plowing fields, you are constantly training in arms, riding for hours, managing your estates, and engaging in warfare. All of this demands significant energy, which your diet, rich in meat and fine grains, provides. It truly highlights the incredible physical conditioning of the nobility, who were expected to be both warriors and administrators. They weren't just living, they were commanding, fueled by the bounty of their lands. You feel the familiar chill of the morning air, a dampness that seems to cling to the very fabric of your rough tunic. The scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and something faintly fermented hangs in the air of your small, clustered village. Gone are the endless hours of grinding grain and the monotonous routine of bread and porridge. Now, your world is defined by a different kind of sustenance, one that offers a fleeting moment of warmth and a crucial source of calories ale. And as the sun, still a pale, hesitant light in the gray sky, begins its slow ascent, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the day's first, and perhaps most important, drink. A common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the development of the feudal system, where land was held by lords in exchange for military service and loyalty. This system created a distinct social hierarchy, with the nobility at the top, controlling vast resources, including the most fertile lands and the best hunting grounds. This control directly translated into a superior diet for the lords and their households, setting them apart from the common peasantry. You are a direct beneficiary of this system, enjoying the fruits of the labor of those below you. Your stomach, a familiar void, reminds you of the constant, underlying hunger that permeates life in these fragmented times. You're not thinking of pure, sparkling water, or sweet, exotic wines. Oh no. Your reality is far more practical. For you, living in the heart of the Dark Ages, the very concept of hydration and a significant portion of your daily calories often revolves around fermented beverages, particularly ale. Now for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you while lavish. Noble feasts were often characterized by their sheer quantity and the display of exotic meats like peacock or swan. The actual culinary techniques were often quite simple, focusing on roasting, boiling, and stewing. Complex sauces or intricate presentations were less common than in later periods. The emphasis was on abundance and the quality of the raw ingredients, rather than sophisticated cooking. So, while you might have eaten a lot, the variety of preparation might have been less than you'd expect. You reach for your wooden cup, its surface smooth from countless uses. It's filled with ale, a murky brownish liquid, often thick with sediment. This isn't the clear, effervescent beer of modern times. This is a hearty, nutritious drink, brewed from barley, oats, or rye, and often consumed by everyone, from children to the elderly. Throughout the day, imagine trying to start your day with just water, knowing the risks of contamination. This ale is a far safer and more nourishing alternative. One of your neighbors taking a long swig might declare, "This ale is so thick, I think it counts as breakfast and lunch." The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise health impacts of the noble diet during the Dark Ages. Some scholars argue that while rich in calories and protein, the diet's emphasis on meat and refined grains, coupled with less fresh produce, might have led to issues like gout, obesity, and other diseases of affluence for the time. Others contend that their active lifestyle and access to some fresh produce would have mitigated many of these risks, and that their overall health was generally superior to that of the peasantry. It's a complex puzzle, trying to balance the evidence of privilege with the realities of ancient nutrition. You take a long gulp, feeling the earthy, slightly sweet, and sometimes mildly sour taste coat your tongue. It's refreshing, surprisingly filling, and provides a gentle warmth that spreads through your body. A welcome sensation in the often cold dwellings. The alcohol content is typically very low, often less than 1 to 2%, making it more of a liquid food than an intoxicating beverage. It's a vital part of your daily caloric intake, a liquid meal that sustains you through the long, arduous hours of manual labor. It's less about getting drunk and more about staying hydrated, nourished, and healthy. You recall a particularly grand feast hosted by a neighboring lord. The hall was filled with music, laughter, and the intoxicating aroma of roasted meats and spiced wine. You remember a moment when a jester, perhaps a little too bold, looked at the overflowing table and, with a twinkle in his eye, muttered, "My lord, I think your belly is growing faster than your kingdom." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the hall, but the lord merely chuckled, a testament to his good humor and perhaps his expanding waistline. The prevalence of ale and other fermented drinks like cider or mead in regions where honey was abundant was driven by several crucial factors. Firstly, water sources were often contaminated. Wells could be shallow and easily polluted by waste. Rivers could carry disease, and stagnant ponds were breeding grounds for bacteria. Boiling water would kill pathogens, but it was fuel-intensive and time-consuming. Fermenting grains into ale, however, was a natural purification process. The brewing process involved boiling the water, and the subsequent fermentation created an environment hostile to many harmful microorganisms. This made ale a far safer choice for daily consumption than raw water. The social rituals surrounding meals were elaborate. The lord and his family would sit at the high table, with knights and important guests arranged below them according to rank. Servants would attend to every need, carving meat, pouring wine, and clearing trenchers. These meals were not just about eating, they were social events, opportunities for political negotiation, displays of power, and moments of communal bonding among the elite. You learn the unspoken rules of the table, the subtle gestures, the proper etiquette. Secondly, ale provided essential calories and nutrients in a diet often lacking in variety and fresh produce. The carbohydrates from the grain in ale, along with some vitamins and minerals from the brewing process, were incredibly valuable. It was a liquid bread, easily digestible, and a consistent source of energy for a population engaged in physically demanding lives. Imagine trying to work in the fields all day on just dry bread. The ale provided that extra boost, that sustained energy release. The tools for eating were more refined than those of the peasants, but still simple by modern standards. Fine linen cloths covered the tables, and guests might have personal knives for cutting meat. Spoons were common, but forks were still rare. You ate with your hands, tearing at meat, scooping up sauces with bread, a direct tactile experience that connected you intimately with your food. The brewing process itself was often a household chore, particularly for women. You might spend a day mashing grains, boiling the wort, and then adding yeast to begin fermentation. The equipment was simple, large wooden vats, clay pots, and perhaps a few linen cloths for straining. The techniques were passed down through generations, a vital piece of household knowledge. You learn to recognize the subtle signs of a good brew, the right temperature, the correct amount of time for fermentation. It's a skill as important as baking bread or tending the fields. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of living a life of relative abundance, knowing that just beyond your castle walls, most people faced daily hunger. It instilled a sense of responsibility, perhaps, but also a deep understanding of your privileged position. It shaped your worldview, your expectations, and your relationship with the vast majority of the population. This constant awareness of social hierarchy permeated every aspect of your daily life and your relationship with food. The taste and quality of ale varied wildly from household to household, and from region to region. There was no standardization, no quality control. Some batches might be thin and watery, others thick and murky. Some might be sweet, others sour, depending on the grains used, the wild yeast present, and the skill of the brewer. You learn to accept these variations, to appreciate the good brews and tolerate the less palatable ones. It's a constant culinary lottery, but one you're always willing to play. Sometimes you'd hear stories from traveling merchants or returning crusaders, tales of truly exotic foods from the distant east, spices beyond imagination, fruits never seen in Europe, or dishes prepared with a sophistication that defied understanding. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. Beyond daily consumption, ale also played a significant social role. It was consumed at feasts, gatherings, and celebrations, fostering a sense of community and camaraderie. It was a symbol of hospitality, offered to guests and travelers. It was a common bond, shared by all, from the lowliest peasant to the highest lord. Even if the food was scarce, there was often ale to share. The noble diet of the Dark Ages, while a stark contrast to the peasant's fare, was still a product of its time. It wasn't designed for endless variety or modern nutritional balance. It was designed for power, status, and the sustenance of a ruling class. And it worked. The lords ruled. They fought, and they maintained their authority, fueled by the bounty of their lands and the labor of their people. You are a living testament to that privilege. Your body well fed, your spirit confident, shaped by the demands and opportunities of your station. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of having a safe, nourishing drink readily available in a world of uncertainty. It provided a sense of comfort, a small pleasure in a life often defined by hardship. It was a source of warmth in cold dwellings, a source of energy for weary bodies. It was a constant, reliable presence in a world where little else was. You feel the gentle buzz, the slight relaxation, a brief respite from the anxieties of daily life. As the golden light of the setting sun streams through the great hall, painting the tapestries in warm hues, you finish your evening meal, another piece of roasted meat, perhaps a final sip of fine wine before settling down for a comfortable night's rest. The sounds of the castle fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of the night watch. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of privilege that awaits you with the dawn. One common historical fact about the Dark Ages is the widespread illiteracy among the general population. While monasteries preserved learning, most people lived in an oral culture. This meant that practical knowledge, like brewing, was passed down through apprenticeship and demonstration, rather than written recipes. The art of brewing was a deeply ingrained part of household and community life, learned by doing and observing. You would have watched your mother or grandmother brew from a young age, absorbing the techniques through repetition. You feel a profound sense of quiet settle around you, the echoes of countless meals, both meager and grand, fading into the soft hum of the night. The scent of coarse grain, stale ale, wild herbs, and roasted meat lingers faintly in your memory, a complex tapestry woven from necessity and occasional indulgence. Gone are the specific dwellings and the distinct social classes. Now you are merely an observer, reflecting on the universal truths of sustenance in the Dark Ages, a story of hard-won hunger, remarkable resilience, and the sheer ingenuity of survival. Now for a lesser-known detail that might surprise you, some Dark Age ales were brewed with a variety of herbs and spices. Known as Groot, long before hops became the dominant flavoring agent. These Groot mixtures could include bog myrtle, yarrow, mugwort, and even juniper berries, each contributing unique flavors and sometimes mild psychoactive or medicinal properties. So, your ale might have tasted quite different from modern beer, with complex, earthy, and sometimes bitter notes that went beyond just fermented grain. It adds a layer of unexpected complexity to their brewing practices. The moon, a silent witness, casts a gentle glow through your window, illuminating the quiet space around you. You lie comfortably, but your mind still wanders through the vast tapestry of history, considering the incredible dietary challenges faced by those who lived through this fragmented era. Life for them was never about culinary delight. It was about the raw, unyielding necessity of finding enough to eat, a constant negotiation with a world that offered little in the way of certainty. And as the night deepens, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the overarching lessons of their diets. The academic debate still continues among historians regarding the precise nutritional contribution of ale to the Dark Ages diet. While it clearly provided calories and hydration, some scholars argue that the low alcohol content meant it wasn't a significant source of vitamins, especially B vitamins, which are often destroyed by heat during brewing. Others contend that the sheer volume consumed, combined with the unrefined nature of the grains, meant that ale provided a surprisingly robust nutritional boost, helping to prevent certain deficiencies in a challenging dietary landscape. It's a complex puzzle, trying to understand the full health impact of their daily liquid bread. Your stomach, now content and full, offers a stark contrast to the chronic hunger that often gnawed at the people of the Dark Ages. You're not thinking of your next meal, but rather contemplating the sheer human capacity for endurance and adaptation that defined their relationship with food. For them, every bite was a victory, every preserved morsel a testament to foresight, and every successful harvest a cause for profound relief. You recall a particularly long, hot day working in the fields. The sun beat down relentlessly, and your throat felt parched. You remember the moment when your Lord Steward brought out a large wooden barrel of fresh ale, and the collective sigh of relief that swept through the workers. The ale was warm, thick, and incredibly refreshing. You took a long, grateful swig, feeling the energy return to your weary limbs. One of your fellow laborers, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, might have chuckled. "This ale is so good. I think it could make a dead man dance." It was a moment of simple, profound gratitude, a testament to the power of a good brew. Consider the common threads that weave through the diets we've explored. The peasant, perpetually chewing on coarse, gritty bread and thick porridge, stretching every last grain. The monastic brother, adhering to strict fasts, finding spiritual solace in bland, simple fare. The feudal lord, enjoying the bounty of his lands, yet still bound by the limitations of preservation and seasonal availability. Each individual, each social stratum, faced a diet that was, by modern standards, incredibly restrictive, often monotonous, and frequently quite unappetizing. The social hierarchy of the time was also reflected in ale consumption, though less dramatically than with food. While lords might have access to finer, clearer ales, or even wine, the basic murky ale remained a universal drink. It blurred some of the lines between social classes as everyone, regardless of status, relied on this fermented beverage for sustenance and safety. It was a great equalizer, a common thread running through all levels of society. This wasn't a failure of culinary imagination, it was a triumph of practicality, resourcefulness, and sheer necessity. In a world without refrigeration, without efficient long-distance transportation, and with constant threats of famine, disease, or warfare, food had to be calorie-dense, easily storable, and highly resistant to spoilage. The grains, wheat, barley, rye, oats, and millet, formed the absolute backbone of almost every diet because they met these criteria perfectly. They could be stored for long periods, ground into flour or porridge, and provided the sustained carbohydrate energy needed for physically demanding lives. Imagine trying to run a modern household with only what you could grow or preserve yourself. You'd quickly appreciate the genius of a well-stocked granary. The tools of drinking were as simple as the ale itself, wooden cups, pottery mugs, or even hollowed-out gourds. There were no delicate glasses, no elaborate serving rituals for the common folk. You drank directly from the vessel, often sharing it with others, a simple act of communal sustenance. It was a practical, unadorned experience, connecting you directly to the drink that sustained you. Protein, while often less abundant than carbohydrates, was sourced with remarkable ingenuity. Legumes like peas, beans, and lentils were crucial plant-based proteins. Dairy products, cheese, curds, and sour milk provided vital animal protein and fats, often preserved through fermentation. Meat, when available, was meticulously salted, smoked, or dried. And as we saw, even less conventional sources like insects were utilized in times of desperate need. These were not choices made for pleasure, but for pure, unadulterated survival. One might observe with a wry smile. It seems the Dark Ages truly embraced the waste not, want not philosophy, even if it meant eating things we now pay extra to avoid. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of knowing that your primary source of hydration and a significant portion of your daily calories came from this fermented beverage. It instilled a deep sense of trust in the brewing process, a reliance on the skill of your community. It was a constant reminder of the ingenuity required to survive in a world without modern amenities. This intense connection to the craft of brewing, to the cycles of fermentation, shaped every aspect of your daily life and your relationship with this vital liquid. Hydration was another constant challenge, often met by turning to fermented beverages. Ale, cider, and even diluted wine were safer to drink than often contaminated water sources. The brewing process purified the water, and the drinks themselves provided additional calories and some nutrients. These low-alcohol beverages were consumed throughout the day by all ages, serving as a liquid form of sustenance. It makes you wonder if ancient hangovers were less about too much alcohol and more about too much very thick, grainy ale. Sometimes you'd hear stories from traveling merchants or wandering monks, tales of distant lands where grapes grew in abundance and fine wines flowed freely, or of exotic drinks made from strange fruits. These were whispered legends, culinary myths that offered a brief escape from the present reality. You'd listen intently, imagining the flavors, the textures, the sheer novelty of something different. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of culinary fantasy. The psychological impact of such monotonous and often precarious diets cannot be overstated. Day after day, the same flavors, the same textures, the constant underlying hum of hunger. It was a relentless test of mental fortitude, a subtle form of discipline that went hand in hand with the physical hardships. To endure such a diet without complaint, to find sustenance in the blandest of foods, required an incredible strength of will and a profound acceptance of one's place in the natural order. You can almost feel the dull ache of perpetual hunger, the longing for something, anything, different, yet knowing it was a luxury rarely afforded. The reliance on ale in the Dark Ages, while seemingly unusual to modern sensibilities, was an incredibly effective adaptation. It wasn't designed for pleasure or intoxication, it was designed for raw survival, for health, and for providing crucial energy in a fragmented, unpredictable world. And it worked. People endured, they adapted, and they slowly began to rebuild, fueled by the ingenuity and sheer physical effort that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are a living testament to that adaptability. Your body hardened by the regimen, your spirit unbroken by the constant demands of a challenging era. Yet, within this monotony, there were moments of unexpected joy and profound appreciation. The rare communal feast after a successful harvest, the occasional piece of fresh game, the sweetness of a wild berry found during foraging, the comforting warmth of a bowl of thick porridge on a cold winter night. These moments, however fleeting, provided a vital psychological release, a reminder that life could offer more than just grim sustenance. They were cherished, remembered, and perhaps even exaggerated in the telling, becoming culinary myths that sustained hope during leaner times. As the pale light of dawn strengthens, you finish your morning ale, you wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, feeling the lingering taste of barley, you clean your wooden cup, ready it for tomorrow, and prepare for another day of arduous labor in the fields. The sounds of the awakening village fade into a gentle hum, punctuated by the distant calls of birds. You close your eyes for a moment, already anticipating the familiar taste of this vital liquid that awaits you throughout the day. A common historical fact that unites these diverse dietary experiences is the overwhelming dependence on local agriculture and the annual harvest cycle. The success or failure of the crops directly determined the well-being, and often the survival, of entire communities. This direct, visceral connection to the land meant that weather patterns, soil fertility, and agricultural techniques were matters of life and death. It fostered a deep respect for nature's bounty and a profound understanding of the delicate balance required for survival. You feel the biting chill of late autumn, a cold that promises the long, lean months ahead. The scent of wood smoke is heavier now, a constant presence as families huddle closer to their hearths. Gone are the days of relatively abundant ale and the simple comfort of grain. Now, your world is defined by the brutal reality of seasonal scarcity, a relentless cycle of feast or fast, and as the sun, a weak, watery disk, begins its slow descent towards the horizon, your thoughts, inevitably, turn to the dwindling stores and the gnawing anxiety of winter. Now, for a lesser-known detail that might tie these diets together despite the general scarcity, there was often a surprising amount of culinary knowledge and regional variation. While the staples were universal, local ingredients and traditional preparation methods created distinct flavors and dishes. For example, while bread was ubiquitous, the type of grain, the method of baking, and the additions like herbs or seeds could vary significantly from one village to the next, creating a subtle, unwritten culinary map of the era. So, while you might be eating porridge, it wouldn't be exactly the same porridge everywhere you went. Your stomach, a familiar void, reminds you of the constant, underlying hunger that permeates life in these fragmented times. You're not thinking of a varied meal, a culinary adventure. Oh no. Your reality is far more stark. For you, living in the heart of the Dark Ages, the very concept of food availability is a cruel game of chance, dictated by the unpredictable whims of nature and the unforgiving calendar. The academic debate still continues among historians and nutritionists regarding the precise long-term health consequences of the Dark Ages diet for the general population. While skeletal remains show evidence of malnutrition, dental wear, and various diseases. Some scholars argue that the active lifestyle, combined with the ingenuity of foraging and fermentation, provided a surprisingly robust, albeit minimal nutritional profile that allowed for remarkable resilience. Others contend that chronic hunger and nutrient deficiencies were widespread, contributing to shorter lifespans and increased susceptibility to illness. It's a complex and ongoing discussion, trying to understand the full picture of health and longevity in these ancient populations, balancing hardship with undeniable human adaptability. You walk through the fields, now barren and skeletal, the stalks of harvested grain standing like ghosts in the cold wind. The ground is hard, frozen in places, and the promise of new growth feels impossibly distant. This is the time when the bounty of the harvest, so eagerly gathered, begins its slow, inevitable decline. Every bushel of grain, Every dried piece of meat, every preserved vegetable is counted, rationed, and guarded with a fierce intensity. Imagine trying to plan your meals for 6 months with no guarantee of resupply, knowing that a single miscalculation could mean starvation. One of your neighbors, shivering as he checks his meager root cellar, might sigh. The summer gives, but the winter takes, and it always takes more than it gives. You recall a thought that might have crossed the mind of any person living through these times? If I make it through this winter, I'm going to appreciate every single bite of next summer's harvest. It's a universal sentiment, a testament to the enduring human desire for comfort and pleasure, even in the face of the most challenging diets. The rhythm of your life is entirely dictated by the seasons. Spring brings a brief period of hope, with the first tender shoots of wild greens and the promise of new plantings. Summer is a time of intense labor, but also of relative abundance, with fresh berries, early vegetables, and the anticipation of the harvest. Autumn is the crucial period, the frantic race to gather and preserve everything possible before the cold sets in. And then comes winter, the long, dark, terrifying stretch where survival depends entirely on what you've managed to put aside. The resilience required to adhere to these diets was not just about obedience. It was about understanding the fundamental necessity. Every person knew that their strength, their endurance, and ultimately their survival depended on consuming whatever was available, however unappetizing. It forged not just strong bodies, but incredibly resilient minds. They were masters of self-denial, capable of pushing past discomfort for the greater goal of survival. During the summer and early autumn, there might be moments of relative feast, after a successful harvest, or perhaps after a communal hunt. There would be more food available. You might enjoy larger portions of bread, thicker porridges, and perhaps even some fresh meat or fish. These were fleeting moments of indulgence, eagerly anticipated and deeply savored. The community might gather for a small celebration, a brief respite from the constant struggle, a chance to eat until your belly felt truly full, a rare and deeply satisfying sensation. Imagine the sheer mental fortitude needed to face another day of labor on a diet of coarse bread and thin porridge, knowing that this was your fuel for enduring. It's a level of commitment that few in the modern world could truly comprehend. Their diets were not just about what they ate, but how they ate it, with purpose, with discipline, and with an unwavering focus on the next day, the next season, the next harvest. But these moments were always overshadowed by the knowledge of the coming lean times. As the days grew shorter and the air grew colder, the fast began. Fresh produce vanished almost entirely. Meat became a rarity, reserved for special occasions or when an animal had to be slaughtered early due to illness. Your diet would revert to the monotonous staples dried grains, often stretched with whatever meager legumes or root vegetables remained. The portions would shrink, the meals become thinner, and the hunger, a constant companion, would intensify. Sometimes, you might imagine them, sitting around a meager fire, sharing stories of home, of the foods they missed, of the bountiful harvests they dreamed of. These shared dreams, these collective longings, would have been a powerful bond, a reminder of the world they fought to sustain, and the simple pleasures that awaited them, if they endured. The sheer ingenuity of preservation methods was paramount. Grains were stored in granaries, carefully protected from dampness and pests. Root vegetables like turnips and parsnips could be stored in cool, dark cellars or buried in pits in the ground. Insulated with straw, meat and fish, when available, were salted, smoked, or dried, transforming perishable goods into long-lasting sustenance. Imagine the meticulous care taken with each piece of dried fish, knowing it might be the only protein you see for weeks. The diets of the Dark Ages were, in essence, a reflection of their times, harsh, practical, and utterly unforgiving. They were not designed for culinary exploration, but for raw, unyielding survival. And they worked. People endured, they adapted, and they slowly began to rebuild, laying the foundations for future prosperity, fueled by the ingenuity and resilience that allowed them to extract sustenance from the harshest of conditions. You are left with a profound appreciation for their strength, their endurance, and the sheer human capacity to adapt and survive. One crucial yet often overlooked aspect of seasonal scarcity was the impact on nutrition. The long winter months, and with their almost complete absence of fresh fruits and vegetables, meant that vitamin deficiencies were a constant threat. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, would have been a common affliction, leading to fatigue, bleeding gums, and a general weakening of the body. Other deficiencies, impacting bone health, vision, and immune function, would also have been prevalent. You might feel a constant weariness, your joints aching, your skin dry and cracked, symptoms you simply accept as the inevitable toll of winter,